I mean, you saw the title, you know what it's about, but did you know that the reason the effects in the She-Hulk series look so unfinished is because Marvel Studios, under the direction of Disney, forced all the animators that animated Jennifer's body in She-Hulk form to shrink her muscles down? But you did know that, actually, because that was pretty well documented what happened. When the trailer for She-Hulk first dropped, VFX artist Sean Rucroft made a Twitter reply to fans somewhat upset that She-Hulk's body was not as broad as she is in the comics.
I was at a company that did VFX for this. Apparently she was bigger early on, but the notes kept saying to make her smaller. We always roll our eyes like we did on Sonic, but at the end of the day, artists gotta follow orders.
He explained that Marvel kept telling the VFX artists to make She-Hulk less bulky in her debut appearance, forcing them to reanimate her body over and over again in order to fit the standards they were hoping for. Now, I feel this decision, independent of the creatives who directed, acted, and wrote the show, really undermines the potential impact a character like She-Hulk offers in the context of the MCU. Character design informs how we interpret a character's presence in the story, in the narrative. It's an extension of themselves, and with a character like She-Hulk especially, where physicality is such a large part of her character, just making her taller and giving her green skin, it's not nearly enough. In fact, it's not even a fraction of what a character like She-Hulk needs in order to stand out in the greater landscape. As it stands, She-Hulk is basically just a tall lady with green skin. Tall, curvy, standard. A traditionally attractive woman with a non-threatening physique to the average viewer, but with long, fairly limber limbs. But the result is a character who looks like a taller woman. Nothing distinct, nothing Hulk-like, nothing that indicates that she has incredible strength. Comparing She-Hulk to Hulk or Abomination, both of whom are Hulks, She-Hulk seems frail, unassuming. Even comparing her to the other super soldiers like Captain America or the Winter Soldier, she has a fairly small body compared to their Dorito-sized bodies. Dorito-shaped bodies with broad shoulders and big chests. Even though she has greater power than every single super soldier combined, she is designed to be less physically imposing. She is less physically imposing even than Captain Carter, the alternate version of Peggy Carter, who gets the super serum treatment. So why is that? If you have a piece of paper by you, take it out right now. Let's say you're drawing a character from scratch. Start by drawing circles, soft curves, rounded shapes. These design choices are inviting, simple. They're designed to look appealing, friendly even. Now, compare that to a rectangle or a square. This square is taking up space. It's powerful, it's strong looking, reliable, stable. Now, draw a Dorito. A triangle with a broad top and not sharp angles but soft edges. Imagine shoulders on the broad end, powerful and strong looking, tapering out to a waist. Now, put a square over that bottom part of the Dorito. It balances out the top and offers a broad balance to the even broader shoulders. A powerful, sturdy, strong look. This is the typical design of your average male superhero. Big shoulders, big arms, powerful chest, abdominal muscles. In short, it's a Batman design. It's your Superman design. It's your average Bruce Timm character model for a man. Even the Flash, a character known for being speedy in the Bruce Timm DC animated universe, has this physique. Now take a long rectangle and add two circles, one on top and one at the bottom. This is the average body shape of your average female character in a superhero story, with hips, chest, and a tapered waist. You can even narrow the waist even further, and you're probably having a very similar character design to your average superhero. Obviously fill it in, design it, retexture it, what have you, but that's the general shape we're dealing with when dealing with female superheroes. In this case, we do get the sturdiness of the rectangle, but the inviting curves of the circle. She-Hulk should not have this design. This is the design of Catwoman. It's the design of Black Cat, Black Widow. It's the design of Lois Lane and Mary Jane. It indicates limberness, it indicates flexibility potentially, even maybe speed. But does it indicate great strength, power, the same way that Dorito shape does? I would argue no. In fact, of all the different heroes, She-Hulk is typically one of the few major female superheroes with that Dorito body. The broad shoulders, the broad arms. a being of raw strength. And it tells the reader exactly what She-Hulk is about. Power. Raw strength. But unlike the Hulk, who is like bursting from the seams, bursting out of his own clothing, She-Hulk is often very well dressed. She takes ownership of her strength, providing a mixture of power with a sense of self-assured confidence. This is made all the more clear when contrasted with Jennifer Walter, the human form of She-Hulk. She's a mousy, shy woman, small, maybe even a little short, definitely very thin. And she's often wearing clothing that is either traditionally feminine or avoids drawing attention to the self. This creates contrast. She-Hulk is broad and powerful, Jennifer is small. Jennifer in her human form is shy, introverted. But when taking up space, when broader, when stronger, she feels more confident in herself and allows herself to explore experience in a way that's more distinct. However, flipping back and forth, especially in the She-Hulk show, what we see is that Jennifer becomes more introverted in her human form and uncertain of herself. Because everyone loves She-Hulk, everyone's drawn to She-Hulk. But, by contrast, Jennifer seems to fall in She-Hulk's shadow. Tatiana Maslany naturally slips into both roles as Jennifer and She-Hulk. She embodies the confidence of her green Goliath self, but also the shyness and vulnerability of her human side. And that contrast is essential because it allows us to explore her navigation of the world, of social politics. Are people interested in her only because of her She-Hulk identity or because of the skills she brings to the table? Is it the image of her they're drawn to or herself? That contrast is very important, and that contrast is made a little more important when she has giant muscles as opposed to the same body type as Jennifer and as She-Hulk. It's just She-Hulk is taller. That's the only change made. A bigger, more attention-grabbing self, yes, but not necessarily a stronger self. We are shown her strength, yes, but her character design doesn't indicate strength to us. To make matters more interesting, most of She-Hulk's conflicts are not the kind of fights you can just punch your way out of. They're social discussions, relationships, legal cases. Her strength is an asset, but it is not useful necessarily to solving the core conflicts she faces. It's one of the many things at her disposal when leading her to the conclusion or the solution to her problems, yes, but her strength is not necessarily the thing she relies on in her various stories, though it is something that comes into play in team-up books, so it allows her to be distinct in the greater Marvel universe. But in her personal stories, most often she is navigating social problems. These are not the type of things you can necessarily punch your way out of. So for all of her muscles, it is ultimately unimportant how strong she is. But that strength is very important for who she is. However, as longtime comic fans might know, there is another concern that you might bump into if you decide to make She-Hulk too muscular, if you try to overemphasize her power and raw strength. And to better explain this, I reached out to a certain Lily to explain with some background in character studies. And not that Lily. No.
Hello, Lilyggoth here, Kinkymation to you. So, on the question of, should She-Hulk have more muscles? The answer, from me at least, in my humble opinion as someone who's intimately acquainted with human anatomy, is it's complicated. So, She-Hulk, when it comes to character design, she's an interesting character because, on the one hand, looking the way that she normally looks, you know, a hot woman in gym clothes, when she's called the She-Hulk, it feels off. It's kind of silly. She's dead-ass the World of Warcraft meme, you know, the male orc versus female orc meme, because it's weird, because like, why does the Hulk get to be this giant, hulking, massive muscle monster, and She-Hulk is just hot woman with abs, right? On the other hand, though, just because something is realistic or makes sense doesn't necessarily mean that it works really well in media. Like, what do I mean by that, right? If you guys have ever seen a very muscular woman, like IRL, you will very quickly notice something. They don't look very feminine, like at all. More muscle mass usually means less fat, and less fat usually means that the identifying female features get kind of lost in the sauce. no boobs, barely any hips. It basically chisels you out. So I'm putting up some examples from when Marvel actually tried to make She-Hulk look like the Hulk, right? Which are these, which it doesn't work because the appeal of the character is lost completely. It doesn't look good. And I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Marvel fans in the audience, that most people didn't like this design.
Adding 2 cents as a Marvel fan, yes, this era was not popular. In part because of the appearance, but also because She-Hulk's personality was lost as she became more traditionally Hulk-like. This era was widely criticized by all types of fans, in part because the She-Hulk character was lost.
They have done this. It just didn't work. You can call it a biology thing, gender differences, social construct, whatever. But here's the thing. Just like how men like to be cool and like strong in media, women generally want to see themselves as like the ideal woman. They want to be beautiful, they want to be sexy, attractive, whatever. Like, we can say this all we want, but in reality, most main characters in media tend to be fairly conventionally attractive, and if you make a woman that is a mass of muscle, like the Hulk is, she's not going to look very feminine. And that might be a problem. If you make it super realistic and you remove all of the femininity from a character called She-Hulk, then it's way less appealing than it would be the way that she normally looks. Now, can you add more muscle to this? Should you add more muscle to this? Yes, you absolutely can. However, and this is really important, if you're going to make a character that is going to have features that would traditionally be considered more masculine, you have to hype up the femininity in other spaces. I have some examples. So there's a lot of really buff ladies in media that actually do this pretty well. I'm gonna give you guys the top 3 off the top of my head. The first one being Noi from Dorohedoro. This is from an anime. This is a character that when you first meet her, she's in like a full tracksuit and wearing a mask. You can't tell that she's a woman at a glance, but then she takes off the mask and look at her face. Look at her outfit. Noi, look at her. She's stunning, right? She's a very strong character. She's, again, built like a brick shithouse. I think that this is the body type that they should try and give She-Hulk if they wanted to buff her up a little bit more. But if they do that, they cannot change her face. She needs to have the face of the hot She-Hulk with the body that's a little bit more sculpted. Because if you get rid of that feminine face, you get rid of the appeal of the character. It's She-Hulk, right? Hell, I would actually argue that if they just changed the name of the superhero, the problem would be solved, but like, this is supposed to be the feminine counterpart of the Hulk. So fine, if it's gonna be the feminine counterpart, put emphasis on that femininity. Another example I got, this is Zarya from Overwatch. Again, buff, built like a brick shithouse, super strong, but look at her face. Full lips, really big eyes, like, it's very like high femme elements when it comes to her face or her outfit or her mannerisms that be like, you know what? Yeah, this is a woman despite the fact that she's incredibly muscular. And again, you do have to play into the fantasy a little bit, despite the fact that realistically, a woman this size would not have boobs at all. But the proportions are a little bit more on the realistic side. However, her face is absolutely just stunning. It's not chiseled like the rest of the body is. Like, if I show you guys the time that Marvel actually tried to make She-Hulk like the Hulk, this doesn't look like a woman. If it wasn't for the boobs, I would not be able to tell. This is a masculine face. It's incredibly chiseled. It's very, it's not soft at all. It looks like the Hulk if we gave the Hulk boobs, dead ass, and just longer hair. But then you have a woman like Zarya, and she's muscular, but her face is so feminine that you at a glance know, yeah, this is a woman. It's not because of the pink hair. It's not because of the boobs, because Noi doesn't have any of those things, but like, look at her face. Ripped, buff, abs, stunning girl. Stunning, stunning girl. Full lips, big eyes, softer features, really long, fluffy hair. Hell, even feminine outfits will do the trick. And my last example, which is Marissa from Street Fighter, this is probably the one that has like the least feminine body type out of all of them. Like, this one is a square. But, she is incredibly feminine in almost everything that she wears and almost everything that she does. Despite the fact that she has a very muscular physique, she still emphasizes her femininity through clothing and accessories, right? So I think that, should She-Hulk have bigger muscles? Probably. But if you're going to do that, keep the femininity alive, because that way she can still be She-Hulk while being a little bit more realistic in the proportions that she should have as the female counterpart to the Hulk. So hopefully this has been helpful.
This is made all the more interesting when you consider how She-Hulk physically compares to another female superhero in the MCU with super strength, that being Jessica Jones. Both are very strong characters, but Jessica Jones is very unassuming as her normal civilian form, and this is kind of to indicate her character design. She's very anti-authoritarian, she's very subdued, but also very sassy. She doesn't want to draw attention to herself because she's trying to push people away from herself. Jessica Jones is unassuming. You would never expect this tiny pipsqueak of a woman to be able to drag cars around the streets of New York City. But she can, and she will when needed to. But she also relies more on stealth, more on blending into the background. Her strength is more a way of defending herself. She-Hulk is not that. She's attention-grabbing. She draws your eye. The distinction there is communicated through character design, through the way they dress. Jennifer is usually drowned in scarves and all that. She-Hulk not so much. Now in the comics, She-Hulk is often seen in superhero teams like the Avengers or the Fantastic Four. Specifically with the latter, when Ben Grimm, the Thing, leaves the Fantastic Four temporarily, She-Hulk fills in for him, filling up that silhouette of the broad, strong guy on the team, the tank. And she needs to be as formidable as the Thing. And you really can't do that if you're limber and light. You have to be broad and strong. And her silhouette in that lineup fulfills that. She-Hulk's massive muscles shows she can fill in for the Thing, a guy known for being able to punch things hard. Yes, she's taller. Yes, she's more attractive than the Thing, obviously. The Thing is a rock monster, known for his ugliness. But that doesn't really change the fact. She's still a very powerful figure, and her character design reflects that. And she's still a monster like the Thing, though again, a much more appealing looking monster. The idea that She-Hulk needs to be appealing, that's not a problem, but she needs to be strong, and her strength needs to be visible. That's important. It's an element of her character that seems to have been forgotten in the MCU. Made all the more frustrating when male characters are allowed to have different character body types. Compare Spider-Man, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Wolverine, Captain America. Different body shapes communicating different elements of the character. Spider-Man is, of course, a very limber character. He's able to bend in different positions, he's able to crawl on walls, he has more arachnid movements to him. Nightcrawler is more of a fencer. He's a lithe demon, kind of emerging from the shadows, though he is a very gentle person at heart. Colossus is a support unit. He is known to bear the weight of his family's responsibilities, as well as the responsibility of the X-Men. He is a stone in the center of a storm, and his physical metal body reflects that. These characters are designed in a way that communicates exactly what they're about to you. Oh, and Wolverine, he's a short bruiser. Of course, he's a tiny little guy, but he looks aggressive. He's broad, squat, he has a massive hairstyle despite his body being so small. He's hairy and kind of weird and grody looking. He looks like he smells a little bad. But you know for a fact he'll go into a fight with someone, and his appearances are often unassuming. You're not meant to believe he has a heart of gold beneath all that scruff and all that, but he does. And he often supports people who are kind and vulnerable and will take time to help train them. His relationship with Kitty Pryde and Jubilee and all of them is fantastic. He is a mentor to them. He trains them to fight and defend themselves. And despite his appearances, he's quite kind. These characters are allowed to look different and be able to communicate things to the audience that is either in contrast or demonstrates who they are as a hero and who they are as a person. So why do all the female characters have to fulfill certain requirements? Why must they fit into tight little molds? Why do they have to conform to the standards set to them by marketing teams who think if She-Hulk's too big, men won't watch the show, even though, let's be honest, a lot of guys didn't watch the show anyway because of the twerking thing. I don't get that. It was 2 seconds of the show, and apparently it's all people could talk about, that Megan Thee Stallion and She-Hulk twerked. Like, okay, big deal. The rest of the show is much better and worth watching. If you don't like the scene, just watch the rest of the show. I want to tell you. But again, this all communicates something important about the character, doesn't it? That the designs that they have, their physical appearance, their nature, all of that is essential in order to demonstrate what they're about. And a character who is, say, burly and strong, you can assume will be involved with fights. Which also brings up another good point with Jennifer. Despite being so strong, many of her stories are legal dramas. She's a lawyer. She takes cases along with Matt Murdock and all these other lawyer superheroes. Well, two lawyer superheroes, really, just her and Matt Murdock, who are very physically different. But still, that contrast is interesting. Despite being so powerful, she's often set in more domestic cases. Again, a contrast made all the more surreal by her character design. By giving her big muscles, it creates more of a comedic situation with what's happening. The point is, men are allowed to look different in comics, but women, not so much. They have to be either thin or buxom. And if they don't conform to that, what happens? They're changed over time to conform. Consider Squirrel Girl. When Squirrel Girl first showed up in the comics, she was a really weird-looking character. Like, weird-looking, like, all face-painted, all strange. She looked odd. She looked disconcerting. She looked strange. She did not look like she was a traditional female character in a superhero comic. But over time, she was remolded, redesigned to fit the standards that people had set for these characters. And there are very few characters who do not conform to the standard appearance that these superhero women have. And when they do break from that, they're usually presented as the butt end of a joke. Case in point, Big Bertha from the Great Lakes Avengers, who has the ability to expand and contract her body to make it indestructible, super strength, etc. Now, some artists and writers have reinterpreted Big Bertha as a pseudo She-Hulk character, but I feel that's kind of missing the mark for both characters because often She-Hulk takes up more space with her broad shoulders and muscles, whereas Big Bertha usually tries to take up as little space as possible while still being a fashion model. I feel like this kind of defeats the purpose of the characters. Like, I feel like it's like a contrast that is... You can draw a lot of discussion about it, I think, but I'm not going to right now because that's not really for here or there. Point is, though, that the reason Disney made She-Hulk smaller was not because of her character. It did not service the story in any way. It was entirely for how they could put She-Hulk on a poster. Which is bizarre because She-Hulk is one of the most famous characters in Marvel to be put on comic covers and all that in strange, sometimes exploitative, sometimes fan servicey ways to draw readers in. She's the poster child for that, really. It was such a big point that the comic artists and writers made lots of self-aware jokes about it. Having She-Hulk make fun of the shrinking wardrobe that she'd have on the front of covers, or how artists would try to exploit her appearance for profit. It became a running gag and part of her breaking the fourth wall as a character. Her appearance led to her being sexualized, which led to her character becoming self-aware, beating Deadpool a full decade to the whole breaking the fourth wall superhero shtick that has become so popular with Deadpool's character. And when the She-Hulk show came out, some people said, oh, she's just ripping off Deadpool, when it was really the opposite way around. It's very interesting how that works out, I think. What's interesting, though, of course, is how different artists have interpreted her character by making her more inviting. You know, because again, the reason why Disney probably did this was to make her more inviting to a general audience, but artists have figured out ways to make her appear more inviting without shrinking her body. Consider the Rainbow Rowell run on Sensational She-Hulk. Artist Andre Genolet draws She-Hulk with this wealth of emotions, able to use her broad posture and facial expressions to fully invite you into her every thought and emotion. It's incredibly well realized how the art really communicates She-Hulk's personality at every second. Additionally, artists like Jen Bartel take the time to fully present her confidence, emphasizing her impostures where she takes up as much space on the page or panel as possible. And this is mixed often with her having some trendy or confident fashion choice, granting her both a power of strength, because she is again presented as very broad, but also a sense of glamour, a sense of confidence, which is so important. The fusion of both physical power and social power. Artists have known for years how to strike this balance, which makes the MCU's choice to avoid this balance all the more striking. And again, this isn't something bad about the show. The show is good. The show is directed as though She-Hulk's character reflects this balance. The characters act as though She-Hulk reflects this balance. But the problem is they're working against her appearance, which again had to be re-rendered and redesigned constantly to shrink her muscles. If they just settled with her big muscles from the start, the effects would have looked better. And as a result, a lot of comments about how She-Hulk's face doesn't move quite right or express her emotions fully would have been rendered moot. Her skin would have looked more realistic, the pores would be more apparent, you would have felt more like it was actual skin, like in the MCU films, as opposed to a kind of a green veneer over the flesh. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't look quite right. And that's because they had to redesign the character to fit Disney's continually shifting standards for what they wanted She-Hulk to look like. But it's not just She-Hulk that goes through this. There are other characters as well, who are also larger and are shrunken down in adaptations or even other comics. I mentioned Big Bertha from Marvel, but then there's also Big Barda from DC, a titanic statuesque woman who dwarfs men around her, a new god, a powerful figure whose size and mass is meant to show she is titanic. And she's a really cool character. Underutilized, I think, too, outside of the comics. And while I'm on the soapbox, let's talk about Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is either drawn in the comics as limber and thin, or really broad and strong, as you'd expect of an Amazon. Again, the Amazons in mythology were warrior women. They were just as strong as Hercules. They had the strength of demigods, and yet they're often drawn as more like the physicality of a model. I think the best example of an artist really reinterpreting Wonder Woman is Darwin Cook's Justice League: The New Frontier, where he draws Wonder Woman as an Amazon, as tall, as broad, taller than Superman. And Superman is about 6'3", and Wonder Woman in New Frontier has a few inches on him. It is a great moment of power when Wonder Woman stands up to Superman and he has to look up to her. It's a great case that shows how powerful she really is, even to the Man of Steel, a figure that we know has immense strength. And Darwin Cook was very aware of what he was doing. But at the same time, he also faced pushback for this creative decision. And despite people loving this decision now, DC really did push back on it.
They had problems with my version of her. And again, it was like they were, oh my god, hey man, what's with this really chunky Wonder Woman? And I started putting all this together, and with every one of these characters, I was trying to think, what's going to be different with my take on them that's still consistent with who they should be? So with her, it was, I'm going to make her the biggest of the bunch. She's a goddess. She's a warrior goddess. I've met thousands of people who have read this book, and that's their favorite scene, hands down, by a wide margin.
And while there are other Wonder Women that also have that more strong physicality, Wonder Woman Earth 1 I think is a great example of this. Compare Darwin Cook's Wonder Woman to the DC AU's Wonder Woman. That is to say, Justice League Unlimited, etc. The Batman animated series version. And yeah, Wonder Woman is strong in that. She is powerful, she's very cool. But her body type is the same as Catwoman's, as Lois Lane's, as Harley Quinn's. And all of these characters' designs are meant to relay something about their personality. Let's try something real fast. Take from the DC animated universe Scarecrow, Mr. Freeze, Nightwing, Tim Drake, and the Joker. Put them next to each other and make them shadows, make them silhouettes. Can you tell which one's which? Of course you can. Now let's take Darkseid, Superman, Lex Luthor, and Mr. Mxyzptlk. Put them next to each other. Shadow them out. Can you tell which one's which? Yeah, of course you can. It's simple, right? Because the characters are designed in such a unique way where every one of them, even if you blacked out every single feature they had, you can tell who they are by the shape of their bodies. I think you see where this is going, right? If you were to shadow out Wonder Woman, Catwoman, Harley Quinn, and Lois Lane, take off their costumes, put them in normal clothing, and put them side by side with each other, you could not identify them by silhouette. You just can't. They're too similar looking. Maybe their hair, but let's have their hair down so Harley Quinn's pigtails aren't a factor. Yeah, it's harder to tell, right? You can't really figure it out. It's difficult because they are not designed to look different or distinct without their costumes on. It's disappointing. And again, we can't say anything about live action. I don't want to shame anyone for the physical appearance. Unlike She-Hulk, who is CGI'd to be strong, you really can't change the physicality of these real women. You know, that's a little different. Real-life body shaming is something that happens constantly in Hollywood. And in superhero films especially, there is a lot of cases where women are shamed for their bodies. Very famously, Alicia Silverstone, while filming Batman and Robin, was constantly mocked by both the press and the costuming department of Warner Brothers for her body. The problem is that there is a culture where women's bodies are critiqued publicly, and I do not intend on doing that with this. I'm talking mainly about animation, art, illustration, not real people. And I want to emphasize that right now, because I do not want to contribute to that culture of shaming women for their appearances at all. Historically, what I'm getting at is that women in superhero stories have had a very typical body type. I think I proved my point at this, which makes stuff like Marvel Rivals all the more interesting. Marvel Rivals has so creatively redesigned characters to look different, even characters who traditionally look a certain way. I brought up Squirrel Girl before, right? Compare Squirrel Girl from the original appearance of her comics to her main line appearance in the comics to how she looks in-game. The designers were not afraid to make her fuller figured, to make her broader. And that's a really major design choice. It means that they're willing to make a character who is essentially a young woman look like a real young woman. It makes her feel more grounded in realism, makes her feel more distinct. And adding to that, the other character designs to an extent match this change, this shift. Especially the recent release of Emma Frost. Emma Frost in the comics is traditionally presented as like a model. She is glamorous, she is very slender, very lithe. Whereas in the games, that is certainly not the case.
That is ridiculous. What the fuck? No, hold on, wave, zoom, and enhance. That is, I'm measuring with my fingies right now. It's as wide as her, it's wider than her shoulders.
I think it was also because of this design choice that she got a lot of attention from fans. Her character reveal trailer is the most viewed thing on the Marvel Rivals YouTube page, meaning a lot of people were very interested. A lot of people. Marvel Rivals has typically been very good with character designs. They've taken a more cartoonish approach with how they design the characters, which allows all the characters to look very distinct. The Hulk has a very exaggerated Dorito body with a small tapered waist and even larger shoulders with a small head on top of said shoulders to make the shoulders by comparison look even bigger. Captain America, same thing. He has a very broad Dorito body type. Spider-Man, very limber. And Venom, well, they did this to Venom, so I think this has everything I need to say about their priorities as character designers. Also, small detail, why is that when Venom twerks, everyone loves it, but when She-Hulk twerks for a few seconds, suddenly it's the end of the world? Design choices like alternate costumes, including the Malice skin for Invisible Woman, indicate that they are willing to take risks and redesign characters, even less remembered costumes of characters, in order to draw attention. I guarantee you that nobody was thinking about Malice from Fantastic Four until Marvel Rivals put that as Invisible Woman's skin, and even then took a lot of liberties with how the costume looks to both avoid the more exploitative nature of said costumes while also empowering them. What makes Marvel Rivals character design so interesting is that they avoid a lot of the pitfalls of the more exploitative design choices. They don't feel like they're made entirely for the male gaze. That's one thing that's very interesting about the examples I mentioned before regarding the She-Hulk comics of the modern era. Many of those are not made for the male gaze. They're not made to be exploitative to men. They are made to look empowering to a woman. Especially, again, the Jen Bartel art, which I feel is definitely something Jen Bartel's artistic career has kind of focused on doing. Presenting women through the female gaze. And that's very important because women obviously are comic fans. They want to see themselves in the medium of comics, not presented by men, but by themselves. Self-actualized ideal wish fulfillment through the page. I think what's happening gradually is that as the comic medium becomes more diverse in terms of creators behind the page, artists, writers, etc., people behind the cameras and behind the scripts of their adaptations, like with She-Hulk, we're seeing a lot of people push against traditional stereotypical design choices that become prevalent in the comic medium up until this point. But we are not fully there yet, and there will always be pushback. Consider I Am Not Starfire, the comic that was made a while back about Starfire's teenage daughter. That story became a huge point of controversy among reactionaries online because of the way that Starfire's child was designed. A teenage daughter who looks like a teenager, a real teenage girl in America. Or at least some teenage girls in America. Also, because this comic is so controversial, I want to emphasize right now, I do not think this comic is actually any good. I think it's actually kind of bad, as a matter of fact. I don't think there's a lot of good merit in it. It's a very whatever comic. It's just a good example because it's so well known for what I'm talking about. Some people pointed to the creator of the comic as being kind of a self-projective, kind of self-insert in that she was projecting her own feelings into the character, which is very unfair. People exist of different sizes and forms, and they're going to want to see themselves in the comics, yes, but to reflect the reality of life, you have to make people look different. Marvel Comics was always presented by Stan Lee as the world outside your window. It was meant to reflect the real world. This is why, as New York has shifted and changed over the years, comics have adjusted, especially with Marvel, to reflect that outside world. With new people coming to the conversation, new people want to bring their own life experiences into the characters. That means character design's physically going to change. They're going to see more diverse body types. She-Hulk conforming to standards is disappointing because She-Hulk was one of the few characters that already broke that mold early on. She was away from that. She was different from that. And by conforming it, what you end up doing is removing an example of comic history, of a character who broke that mold in a way that was distinct and interesting and evolved. Because of her character design, she was allowed to be more exploited, yes, but then in pushback to the exploitation, artists and writers had her talk about the fourth wall, break the fourth wall, poke fun at the exploitative practices of comics at the time in the 70s and 80s. That's a design choice. That is how design influenced creativity. And that's something that should be rewarded, not something that should be hidden, not something that should be pushed back into the corner, but something that should be pushed front and center. And what Marvel Studios and Disney did is prevent that from happening. Because Disney is always about conforming to the standards of the market. They want to make sure they have the most money. They want to make sure they earn the most money. And to do that, they must make their characters conform to the tiny boxes that sell. She-Hulk was made into a product, as all characters are in comics. But to do that, she was shrunk down. The antithesis of what her character should be. She should always take up as much space as she damn pleases. And that means, well, you saw the title. You know what this video is about.
I hate all of you. I don't think that's going to be a lot. It's like 20 seconds.